How beautifully you've chanted your Torah portion this morning, Rafi, and with what enthusiasm and conscientious devotion have you worked in the same month to prepare for your Kabbalat Torah just 3 weeks ago and your Bat Mitzvah today. On both occasions you sang with musicality and have shown how much your Jewish heritage and identity, these beautiful ceremonies, your wonderful blended family, and this community mean to you. I want to ask this morning about the nature of the laws that you've just read for us in your Torah portion, Rafi, and why they are so important for us today. Just as the fourth of the 10 Commandments requires us to remember and observe Shabbat, so in Leviticus, the land is to observe a Sabbath, a day of rest, but every 6 years. What this means in practice is that after 6 years of sowing your field, pruning your vineyard, and gathering in the produce, the land shall be allowed to lie fallow for 1 whole year. There shall be no harvesting, no gathering of grapes from the vineyards. It shall have a year of complete rest. And no one will go hungry, for people will be allowed to eat whatever the land produces in and of itself naturally. There's also a second law in this week's Torah portion, which is called the Yovel, the Jubilee year. And you can hear how the Greek and the English Jubilee comes from the Hebrew, Yovel, the same root letters. The Torah famously says, Ukaratem doro ba'aretz lechol yoshveha. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. In the Jubilee year, the 50th year, not only do the agricultural prohibitions of the sabbatical year apply, but tenants who have leased a holding from owners of land must allow the land to revert to its original landholders. In addition, indentured Israelites, that is to say Israelites who are having to work for someone in order to pay back their debt to them, are permitted to return to their homes. In practice, this meant that in the Jubilee year, an amnesty or moratorium was declared on debts and indentured servants. It was a way of rescuing individuals from poverty. There is no doubt that these laws were there in the Torah to ensure that nobody suffered from poverty or economic oppression. In order to understand the Jubilee and sabbatical laws, we need to read these verses that you, Rafi, have just chanted, together with a critical passage in Deuteronomy, a passage that requires creditors to remit all debts to their debtors every 7th year. By doing this, the Torah states that there will be no needy requiring loans or other forms of assistance, since obeying God's teachings will bring blessing and avert poverty. There's something of a contradiction here, because while the laws provide the framework for a society without poverty, the Torah nevertheless acknowledges that there will always be poor in the land, and there will always be the commandment to alleviate one's fellow citizen who falls into poverty. This is what Deuteronomy states, and it's a really important passage that always comes up in our discussions about poverty and about our charitable giving to those who are in need. I quote, "If, however, there is a needy person among you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kin. Rather, you must open your hand and lend whatever is sufficient to meet the need. Beware lest you harbor the base thought, the 7th year, the year of remission, is approaching, so that you are mean and give nothing to your needy kin, who will cry out against the Eternal One against you, and you will incur guilt. Give readily and have no regrets when you do so, for in return the Eternal One your God will bless you in all your efforts and in all your undertakings. For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kin in your land. Several important principles are at work in our two critical texts from Leviticus and this one I've just read from Deuteronomy. One is the underlying teaching that the land does not belong to us. We have no right to ownership. The Torah puts this very simply in a verse, a few verses on from Rafi's Torah portion. Ki li haaretz, ki gerim v'toshavim, atem imadi. For the land is mine, says God. You, Israel, are but strangers, resident with me. Any claim to the land that we may have is as tenants, not as owners. In fact, it's surprising that the whole of the Hebrew scriptures say very little about land ownership. Even a king of Israel, Ahab, could not compel one of his subjects to sell any part of his family estate. The second principle is more complicated. The Torah sets out an ideal, the sabbatical year, the remission of debts, the return of original owners to their land. It's a kind of reset button, if you like, for the earth, preventing overusage or exploitation, a reset in order to bring people out of poverty, a reset for releasing slaves and restoring land to its original owners. I wonder, though, how did all this work in reality? What if a creditor was dependent on being repaid by a debtor? What if an individual had loaned some money to another person and they themselves fall into poverty? Did it mean that in the Jubilee year they would never see that loan returned? And what happens to the leaseholder of a piece of land who's turfed out of their property by the original owners? Would this system not compound poverty and homelessness, forcing people to become slaves once again in order to avoid such circumstances? Could these laws really be put into practice? Certainly, the sabbatical law was practiced. Indeed, it is still practiced and observed in modern Israel every 7 years. And the next one for information is going to be in 2028. But cancelling loans, allowing the so-called owner of a property to return to their land, was it possible to execute such laws in ancient times? I wonder if perhaps what our laws are doing is to represent some kind of ideal society, as though the Torah is saying, this is what the world could look like if we were less materialistic, less driven towards individual ownership and greed or exploitation of our natural world. That vision of creating a world where no one falls into poverty should be simple when the challenge is not about supply, but distribution. Rafi, your parashah, more than any other passage in the Torah, directs our thoughts towards the close connection between poverty and the climate emergency, how we treat our planet. Climate change is the defining challenge of our age, and it is driving a profound societal change that affects all human activity. This transformation raises a host of complex questions to do with social and economic implications for people. However dissonant the ideal feels from the practical execution of these laws, the Torah teaches us the importance of remaining motivated and hopeful. But it's not simply a frame of mind. It has to come with what in Hebrew is called tachlis, creating and executing a strategy that brings about transformation and real change. Rafi, it has been my pleasure to accompany you on this journey towards your bat mitzvah, together with Dov, your teacher, Rabbi Igor, who guided you through Kabbalat Torah. From the moment you joined your cousins at Rimon, who then went to the States, it was clear to me that you are someone very special, kind, happy, modest, outgoing, optimistic, with a great sense of humor. As your mum said, you are the glue who holds everyone together in your large family. And it's so clear to those of us who see you with your younger siblings that we see someone who is generous, responsible, and playful. The generations above you, our generations, place a great deal on the shoulders of young people today, particularly when it comes to caring for the earth. But the truth is, we need to remember that the earth is not ours. We are merely gerim v'toshavim, temporary residents and stewards, charged with exercising responsibility in God's name for all that is part of this beautiful planet. And